Imagine a bright afternoon in a serene city park where everything seems perfect until an encounter with injustice shatters that calm and sets off a chain of events that challenges everything you thought you knew about power, vulnerability, and redemption. What would you do if you were not only the victim but then forced to confront those who abuse their authority? Stay tuned, because this is the story of one woman's battle for justice, a battle that will leave you asking, what should be done when the system fails us? On a radiant afternoon in the vibrant community of Clearwater Park in Boulder Grove, Colorado, life thrummed all around. Children's laughter echoed near playgrounds, joggers maintained their steady pace along tree-lined trails, and families gathered for picnics under the generous shade of majestic oaks. In the midst of this idyllic scene, a black woman sat alone on an aged wooden bench by a sparkling pond. In her lap lay a thick hardcover book, and for a moment, she was completely absorbed in its pages. Her name was Talia, a respected attorney renowned for her relentless fight for civil rights. Today, she had stolen a few precious minutes away from her demanding routine to simply read and breathe in the calm of nature. That moment of tranquility shattered abruptly when the screech of tires announced the arrival of a police cruiser. The vehicle pulled up sharply near the bench, capturing the attention of several park-goers. Two uniformed officers stepped out with expressions hardened by authority, their eyes fixed immediately on Talia, the only person present in that quiet corner. "Ma'am, may we speak with you for a moment?" one of the officers demanded, his tone edged with suspicion rather than genuine concern. Talia looked up from her book, her face composed and steady despite the sudden intrusion. Without a hint of panic, she replied, "Of course, officer." After closing her book deliberately, she prepared herself for what was to come. The second officer, with clipped words and a dismissive attitude, stepped closer. "We received a report about suspicious activity in the area. Could you explain what you're doing here?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as if he already had an answer in mind. Talia's brows furrowed in confusion. "Suspicious activity? I'm just here reading," she answered, holding up her book as proof of her simple purpose. "Identification, please," the first officer demanded sharply. Although Talia's heart skipped a beat at the sudden formality, she maintained her dignity. "I live here, and I'm enjoying a moment of peace in the park," she explained. But the tone of the officers grew more hostile. "We'll see about that," the second officer muttered, as if her explanation was a challenge rather than a statement of fact. Instead of backing off, the officers pressed on with their invasive questions. "Do you always carry that book with you?" one sneered, while the other demanded, "Are you by yourself or waiting for someone?" Their interrogative barrage felt designed to unsettle her, as if they were searching for any excuse to assert control. Talia's well-honed courtroom poise was now met by an unexpected abuse of power on the streets. With measured resolve, Talia reached into her bag and produced her wallet. She handed over her driver's license without hesitation, though a storm of anger and disbelief brewed within her. The first officer scanned the ID with unnecessary intensity. "Talia Jackson," he read aloud in a tone that bordered on mockery, "what is your business here, Miss Jackson?" Talia took a deep breath and replied, "I live in this city. I came here to enjoy the park, just like anyone else." The officers exchanged looks, their expressions hardening further. "Is that so?" one of them said. Instead of moving on, they began to hound her with more questions, each one designed not to clarify but to intimidate. "Do you always have that book with you?" they repeated, as if her reading material was a sign of something sinister. Their scrutiny was relentless. As the small gathering of onlookers grew, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces displayed curiosity, while others betrayed discomfort at the unfolding scene. In that charged moment, the balance of power seemed skewed against Talia. Suddenly, without warning, the first officer's hand shot out to grab her arm. "You're resisting," he accused sharply, even though Talia had not made any move to resist him. "What are you doing?" she demanded, shock and hurt mingling in her voice. The murmurs from the crowd escalated, and a man hastily began recording the incident with his phone. "Stop resisting!" the officer bellowed, his tone now booming as if addressing an invisible audience. In that instant, the cold metal of handcuffs snapped around Talia's wrists. Though her body tensed in disbelief, inside she felt a torrent of humiliation, sorrow, and a deep-seated resolve igniting she would not let this injustice define her. The officers roughly escorted Talia toward the cruiser, dismissing the gasps and murmurs of the onlookers. As she passed, her eyes met those of a young woman. Her name was Paige, who was determinedly recording every moment. There was a silent, pleading exchange between them, a hope that this injustice would not go unnoticed. Yet as the car door slammed shut, Talia realized with a heavy heart that this was only the beginning of her fight. Inside the cramped interior of the police cruiser, the oppressive silence was punctuated only by the distant static of the police radio. Talia's mind raced as she grappled with the sudden reversal of roles. For years, she had stood in courtrooms defending the rights of others and challenging injustice with sharp legal acumen. Now, she found herself caught in the very injustice she had spent her career fighting, a bitter irony that stung with every passing second. Sitting there, Talia's thoughts turned inward. She remembered the countless hours spent in court, her voice unwavering as she defended her clients. But in that moment, her heart pounded with vulnerability. Doubt crept in as she wondered if her strength alone would be enough to overcome this grave abuse of power. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin, and with each passing moment, she felt both the weight of public humiliation and the personal sting of feeling powerless. The internal battle was fierce. Her determination to fight for justice clashed with a deep, searing moment of self-doubt that threatened to overwhelm her. The ride to the station was a blur of heavy silence and racing thoughts. As the cruiser finally came to a stop, Talia was quickly ushered into a station that felt like an extension of the injustice outside. The booking process was handled with an efficiency that left no room for human empathy. Her personal details were recorded, fingerprints taken, and a mugshot snapped, all under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights that buzzed relentlessly overhead. The procedure was clinical and dehumanizing, each step stripping away a bit of the dignity Talia had fought so hard to maintain. Within minutes, she was led to a holding cell, a small, stark room with a cold metal bench and a single, barred window that offered a view of nothing but the flickering lights above. As the cell door clanged shut behind her, Talia sank onto the bench. Here, in the oppressive silence of the detention room, the full impact of the day's events crashed over her. The injustice, the humiliation, the sense of betrayal all converged into a single, overwhelming moment. In the solitude of that cell, vulnerability replaced her usual ironclad resolve. She began to question herself: could she really stand up again after being so publicly diminished? How could she muster the strength to challenge a system that seemed so determined to crush her spirit? For several long, agonizing hours, Talia sat alone with her thoughts. Every minute in that cell felt like an eternity as she wrestled with her emotions: anger, shame, fear, and an aching uncertainty. But as the hours passed, a quiet determination began to grow from within. She recalled every injustice she had ever witnessed, every time she had fought for those whose voices were silenced, and slowly, the vulnerability transformed into a burning resolve. This was not the end, it was a call to rise, to fight harder, to transform pain into power. Eventually, a young officer returned to her cell. "Miss Jackson, you're being charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer," he stated flatly, handing her a document with little explanation. "On what grounds?" Talia demanded, her voice raw with a mixture of anger and despair. The officer replied curtly, "That's for you to sort out in court," and left without a backward glance. Released on bail later that evening, Talia stepped out into the cool night air, a stark contrast to the stifling environment of the station. Awaiting her outside was her longtime friend and confidant, Carmen, whose worried eyes and gentle demeanor offered a momentary reprieve from the day's trauma. Carmen's warm embrace and soft-spoken reassurance reminded Talia that she was not alone, even as the system tried to crush her spirit. As they drove away from the station, Carmen's constant, questioning glances asked silently, "How will you turn this pain into power?" And after a moment of heavy silence, Talia's answer was resolute. "I'm not going to let this injustice pass without a fight," she declared, her voice trembling with both determination and a hidden tremor of doubt that revealed her human fragility. "I have the tools, the knowledge and yes, even my vulnerabilities to fight back." That very night, Talia returned to her modest apartment, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Seated at her kitchen table, surrounded by scattered legal pads, open law books, and notes scribbled in haste, she began crafting a plan. The process was a blend of calculated legal strategy and raw emotional catharsis. Every detail of her experience was recorded with precision. Every slight, every moment of humiliation became fuel for the impending civil rights lawsuit she would file against the officers and the entire department that had betrayed its duty. Yet even as she pored over legal precedents and strategized her next moves, Talia's mind occasionally drifted into moments of deep self-doubt. Sitting alone in the dim glow of her desk lamp, she allowed herself a few quiet minutes to wonder if she was truly strong enough to face the formidable forces aligned against her. But as she recalled the faces of those she had defended over the years, the pain of others' suffering, and the promise of justice, her doubts slowly transformed into a renewed conviction. This was not merely a personal battle, it was a fight for every voice that had ever been silenced. Meanwhile, the officers who had humiliated Talia were not idle bystanders. Officer Mason and Officer Turner, far from simply accepting their fate, began to orchestrate a strategy of their own. Mason, his pride wounded and his authority questioned, started to rally a group of fellow officers who believed that Talia's case was an affront to their very way of life. Turner, initially subdued, soon emerged with a defiant resolve, pushing back with statements and interviews and crafting counter-narratives to undermine Talia's testimony. Their actions, once passive and bureaucratic, evolved into active resistance, a tactical counterattack meant to reclaim their lost credibility and challenge the legal proceedings with every resource at their disposal. As Talia's lawsuit gained traction, a viral video recorded by Paige captured the stark injustice of her arrest. Within days, the video spread like wildfire across social media, igniting heated debates and rallying a chorus of support from communities far and wide. Messages of solidarity poured in, stories of personal struggles against discrimination and calls for systemic reform. Each message further steeled Talia's resolve. She knew that her fight was no longer solely for herself, it was for every individual who had ever been dehumanized by an overreaching authority. In the midst of this turbulent period, Talia's law firm hesitated initially, worried that the public nature of her case might damage their reputation. But Talia's passionate insistence and unwavering commitment convinced them that this was a moment for all of them to stand together. "This isn't just about one incident," she told her colleagues in a hushed yet determined tone. "It's about challenging a system that thrives on silence and fear. We have to set a precedent that abuse of power will not be tolerated." Despite her professional resolve, Talia's emotional journey was punctuated by moments of profound vulnerability. During one late-night session in her apartment, as the storm of legal documents and social media responses swirled around her, she found herself overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the injustice she had experienced. Sitting in front of her laptop, tears welled in her eyes as she reread messages from strangers who had suffered similar fates. In that raw, unguarded moment, Talia questioned whether the fight was worth the personal toll it was exacting. But as the tears subsided, they gave way to a quiet affirmation: her vulnerability was not a weakness, it was a source of empathy, the very quality that would empower her to connect with and inspire others. The case's momentum continued to build as Talia prepared to take the next step, a court date that promised to be as emotionally charged as it was legally significant. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation on the day of the hearing. The case was framed as an internal misconduct review, focusing on the actions of officers Mason and Turner, whose counter-strategies had only added to the controversy. For many, the hearing was a litmus test for accountability within the police department. For Talia, it was an opportunity to finally see justice take shape. As the courtroom filled, Talia walked in with an air of quiet determination. Her black robe flowed gracefully behind her as she took her seat on the bench, a symbolic moment that resonated deeply with everyone present. The atmosphere was electric with tension as Mason and Turner, now visibly more defiant and strategic than before, took their places at the defendant's table. Mason's eyes burned with a mix of indignation and fear, while Turner's jaw was set in a mask of controlled defiance. Their earlier passive demeanors had given way to a calculated effort to fight back. They whispered urgent instructions to their legal team and exchanged determined glances that spoke of an impending counterattack. The proceedings began swiftly. Talia maintained a brisk pace, ensuring that the hearing did not descend into tedious procedural recitations. She allowed the opening arguments to flow, each word measured and impactful. The prosecutor laid out the case against the officers with clinical precision, detailing how their actions had not only violated the law but also shattered public trust. "Your Honor," the prosecutor declared, "the excessive force used against Ms. Jackson was a clear abuse of power, a blatant disregard for the rights of a citizen simply seeking a moment of peace." His voice resonated through the courtroom, punctuating every statement with undeniable clarity. Despite the mounting evidence against them, Mason and Turner fought back. Their defense attorney argued that the situation had been misinterpreted, that the officers had acted in what they claimed was a moment of necessary control. Mason's testimony was laced with attempts to justify his actions, claiming that the circumstances had escalated unexpectedly and that his training had compelled him to act. Turner, though similarly defensive, occasionally allowed hints of regret to seep into his words, a vulnerability that betrayed the internal conflict he felt. Their counter-narratives were forceful, determined to cast doubt on the prosecution's version of events. Yet even as the courtroom drama unfolded, Talia's inner dialogue was a whirlwind of emotions. During moments of silence between testimonies, she allowed herself brief flashes of introspection. In the quiet recesses of her mind, she recalled the painful moments of that fateful day, the disbelief at being handcuffed, the raw sting of humiliation, and the solitary hours spent in that cold cell. Those memories fueled her determination, reminding her that every moment of vulnerability was also a call to fight harder for the dignity of every person wronged by the system. As witness after witness took the stand, the tension mounted. A young man named Jordan recounted how he had been unjustly treated during a routine traffic stop, a story that resonated deeply with the courtroom. His testimony, filled with emotion and painful recollections, painted a vivid picture of the systemic issues that had led to that day's events. Talia listened intently, her pen recording every word as she weighed the evidence with impartial precision. When cross-examination began, the atmosphere grew even more charged. The defense sought to undermine Jordan's account, but his unwavering honesty only bolstered the prosecution's case. Then came the moment when the officers themselves were called to testify once again. Mason's voice wavered as he described his actions in a series of halting, defensive statements. His words, though calculated to shift blame, betrayed a deeper unease, a recognition that his authority had been irrevocably undermined by his own conduct. Turner followed, his testimony marked by a tension that was palpable even to the most distant observer. His attempts to justify his actions grew increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted, and at times, he would exchange furtive glances with Mason, an unspoken acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. As the hearing neared its end, Talia, with a resolute calm that belied the inner turbulence she still felt, delivered the closing instructions. "This is not merely about punishment," she stated, her voice both firm and empathetic. "It is about accountability, about rebuilding trust, and ensuring that every act of abuse is met with unwavering consequences. We owe it to our community to uphold these values." With one final, decisive strike of her gavel, she adjourned the hearing, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with anticipation for what the future would hold. In the days that followed, Talia's case became a beacon for community activism and renewed calls for reform. Her viral video had not only galvanized public opinion but had also forced a long-overdue dialogue about police accountability. As messages of support poured in from all corners, Talia continued to engage with community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens who had been touched by the injustice. Her journey had become more than a personal battle, it was a rallying cry for change. Late one evening, as Talia sat on the steps of the courthouse watching a small group of activists gather for a peaceful demonstration, she paused to reflect on the heavy road that had brought her here. The cool night air whispered promises of hope and change, even as the scars of that day remained fresh. In that quiet, reflective moment, Talia's thoughts turned to you, the viewer. In a system where power is often abused and every victory feels both triumphant and painfully small, what should be done to truly change the status quo? On a bright afternoon in Clearwater Park, nestled in the heart of Boulder Grove, Colorado, Jada, a determined and respected attorney, had sought refuge in the simple pleasure of reading beneath the shade of ancient oak trees. Her world, usually filled with the rhythms of courtroom battles and legal victories, had paused for just a few moments of calm. But the quiet was brutally interrupted when the screech of tires shattered the air, announcing the arrival of a police cruiser. Two officers stepped out with hardened expressions, their eyes locking onto Jada as if they had been waiting for her all along. "Ma'am, may we speak with you?" one demanded, his tone laced with suspicion rather than genuine concern. Jada looked up from her book, her calm resolve unbroken despite the sudden tension. Within moments, the situation escalated. The officers questioned her purpose in the park, demanded her identification, and even sneered at the sight of her book, an innocent symbol of her desire to enjoy a peaceful day. Their relentless barrage of questions was designed to intimidate, to unsettle, and it culminated in a shocking act. Without any provocation, one officer grabbed her arm and declared that she was resisting arrest. In a heartbeat, cold metal handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Inside the cramped cruiser, as the ride to the station unfolded in a suffocating silence, Jada's mind churned with conflicting emotions. Years spent championing the rights of others now left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. The irony was stark. The very woman who had fought tirelessly for justice was now a victim of it. In the claustrophobic space of the vehicle, she battled a torrent of anger, humiliation, and doubt. Could she really find the strength to turn this injustice around? At the station, the dehumanizing booking process was a blur, fingerprints taken, mugshots snapped, and every step executed with a cold efficiency that left no room for empathy. Before she knew it, Jada found herself alone in a small holding cell, the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead echoing the harsh reality of her situation. In that lonely confinement, vulnerability seeped into every thought. She questioned her resolve, wondering if she was strong enough to challenge a system that had so callously betrayed her trust. Yet, even in that dark moment, a spark of determination ignited within her. Jada recalled the countless cases where she had stood up for the silenced, where her voice had been the beacon of hope for those lost in the maze of injustice. With each passing minute in the cell, the anger and humiliation transformed into a fierce resolve, a promise that she would not allow this abuse of power to go unanswered. Released on bail later that night, Jada emerged into the cool embrace of the evening air. Waiting by the curb was her close friend and confidant, Carmen, whose eyes reflected both concern and unwavering support. As they drove away from the station, the weight of the day's events mingled with a determination to take action. "I'm not letting this stand," Jada declared, her voice steady despite the lingering tremors of vulnerability. "I'm going to fight back, not just for me, but for everyone who has been wronged." That very night, in the quiet of her modest apartment, Jada sat at her kitchen table surrounded by legal pads and open law books. The dim light of her desk lamp illuminated pages filled with notes and strategies, a testament to her unyielding resolve to hold the system accountable. In those solitary hours, she allowed herself a rare moment of introspection. The fear and self-doubt that had crept in during her time in the cell now fueled her determination. She was not just fighting to clear her name, she was challenging a corrupt system that thrived on silence and discrimination. As news of her arrest and the viral video recorded by a bystander spread like wildfire across social media, the community rallied around her. Messages of support poured in from every corner, each one a reminder that her struggle was shared by many. At the same time, the officers involved, now emboldened by their own pride, began to strategize. They issued defiant statements, attempting to justify their actions and downplay the injustice. Their efforts to counter Jada's narrative only underscored the deep divide between those in power and the people they were meant to serve. In a dramatic twist, Jada's case evolved into something far larger than a single wrongful arrest. With a civil rights lawsuit on the horizon, she prepared to challenge not only the officers involved but the very systems that allowed such abuses to persist. The courtroom became a battleground for accountability. Jada's relentless pursuit of justice was met with a fierce defense, a determined counterattack from the very figures who had wronged her. Their strategies grew bolder, their rhetoric more combative, as they attempted to undermine her credibility and dismiss her claims. Yet, throughout the heated proceedings, Jada's inner strength shone through. Every tear, every pang of self-doubt, was transformed into a catalyst for change. In the midst of cross-examinations and testimonies, she found solace in her unwavering belief that every voice, every story of injustice, deserved to be heard. Her presence in the courtroom was a declaration, a stand against the systemic abuse of power. Now, as the case continues to unfold and the community's fervor for reform reaches a fever pitch, we are left with a pressing question: what should Jada do next to truly change this broken system? With her unwavering courage juxtaposed against the relentless defiance of those in power, her fight is far from over. Every step she takes is a step toward a future where justice is not just an ideal, but a lived reality. So now, as we reflect on Jada's journey from that fateful afternoon in the park to the high-stakes legal battle that challenges the very foundation of authority, we want to hear from you. In a system where power is too often abused and every victory feels hard-won, what do you think Jada should do next to transform this broken system? Should she push for sweeping legal reforms, seek a public platform to galvanize community action, or take another bold step that we haven't even imagined yet? Your insights and ideas are not only welcome, they're essential. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us work together to imagine a future where justice is truly for everyone.